Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm your host today. I'm joined by my colleague Samuel Luckhurst, who's doing his third podcast of the week. We're milking him dry this week as usual. Samuel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Feeling refreshed anyway.
Yes, do you know what? Funnily enough, so am I. I'm in a really good mood today. We've got Saturday off tomorrow, I think both of us, and then we're making the trip down to the south coast. Hopefully, the sunny south coast. It is the final day of the season, so hopefully the sun comes out and some nice weather. But in the first part of this podcast, Samuel, we'll look back at Wednesday's game against Newcastle. United won 3-2 at Old Trafford, and then a bit later we will look ahead to that Brighton game on Sunday afternoon. So we'll just begin with the Newcastle game. Three goals: Menu, Ahmad, Hoyland. Hoyland obviously started on the bench, but it was a very much needed victory after 3 games without a win.
Yeah, it was a fun game as well. I thought both sides contributed a hell of a lot going forward. Newcastle lacked that indecision, as you said to me, and had flagged to me before the game that was lacking in their draw with Brighton a few days earlier. I think it was just as well for United that Isak was still off colour, particularly with that opportunity at 1-1. It was probably the only thing that Anthony Gordon did wrong all night, and that I think he should have probably taken the ball a bit closer to Sofyan Amrabat. But the timing when he released the ball, it gave Amrabat a chance, and he did brilliantly to block that opportunity. And of course, that was crucial. That would have put Newcastle 2-1 ahead. But with United, Bruno Fernandes made the world of difference. I thought they adjusted really well to the strikerless formation. They were a lot more enterprising. I thought McTominay, particularly in the first half, fulfilled his remit well in that he seemed to dovetail with Fernandes, being at the apex of the attack. He was very good in the aerial duels. Ahmad was excellent again. Kobbie Mainoo has clearly benefited from having a defensive midfielder next to him. Garnacho was probably United's weakest of the front six, but you can cut him that slack. He's been starting so many games this season, and I think he should certainly have a breather against Brighton on Sunday. But scoring three goals, a couple of good goals in there. Some players are in form ahead of the FA Cup final as well, which is long overdue and much needed. They need to have players going into that game who are going to start in a bit of a good groove, I suppose. And as you said, they've just not won many games of late. I think is that 3 wins in the last 11 in the Premier League. Victories have been so scant in the past couple of months. And in the end, it was a very jovial atmosphere. I thought, despite Lewis Hall's goal right at the death, and I mean he scored 2 really good goals at Old Trafford this season. I think we'll see a lot more of him next season in a Newcastle shirt. But I never got the sense that for United, I mean, United have this proclivity of conceding goals in added time, but I never got the sense that was going to happen in terms of conceding a goal that was going to cost them the win on the night. They were very good value for their victory. I can also understand why Eddie Howe sounded a little bit regretful in his press conference afterwards when he said that he didn't feel particularly uncomfortable, that he felt that Newcastle weren't under a great deal of pressure, and I could see where he was coming from, and that they were almost as enterprising in terms of chance creation, but they just weren't as clinical. And also United had a better goalkeeper on the pitch in Andre Onana, who made some good saves, whereas the winning goal was very, very much savable. But I think we saw enough of Martin Dubravka just across his 2 appearances for United that there are plenty of shortcomings in his game.
United almost scored a fourth, actually. Obviously, when Lewis Hall scored, they went up the other side of the pitch and the ball went across the box, and Rashford almost got onto it, didn't he? I mean, from a Newcastle perspective, the 3 goals, I'd say, were very disappointed in the sense that Kobbie Mainoo was left completely unmarked. He found himself in acres of space somehow. He probably couldn't believe his luck. And to be fair, he had the composure to find the bottom left corner. Ahmad was left unmarked at the corner, wasn't he? And the Newcastle almost did it again, I think, a few corners later. So that was clearly tactically
They
deliberate.
did, yeah.
And then and then Hoyland's finish as well. Fair play to him because he created that yard of space and it was a good strike. But as you just said, the Bravka should have done better. And I think if Nick Pope's in goal, he probably saves that. But nonetheless, I think a very good performance from United. And I think there was an intensity about the display that's lacked in recent weeks. I noticed that from the first whistle. Why do you think that was? Do you think it was maybe the atmosphere, the final game of the season, a nighttime game at Old Trafford? Because I thought that was really, really noticeable, actually.
I would put it down to Fernandes. I just think he makes a world of difference. He's probably the only world-class player you would that's in that squad right now, and that has been pretty much the case for most of his time at United. And it, as I've said already, it would be whoever the manager is next season, their job would be harder without Bruno Fernandes. United cannot nip that in the bud, his future, and I'm sure we'll get onto that at some point. But whether he doesn't get everything right, as we all know, but that's part of his game. He takes risks. He wants to affect things. He wants to make things happen. And I've lost count the amount of times where I've been watching him thinking Fernandes is playing so badly at the moment that he's going to do something soon. He's going to score a goal. He's going to get an assist. And one of the recent examples of that was the Liverpool League game. I thought his first half performance that day was one of the worst 45 minutes he's ever had in a United shirt. Second half, he changes the game. I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that Kwanzaa had put it on a plate for him because he was about 40 yards from goal. But the execution of that goal was that was him to a T. And as we kind of studied it on the podcast at the time, the precision of it, and that he took a bit of pace off it, he hit it in a very precise way. And that's what you get with him. Technically, he is just one of the best players, attacking midfielders in Europe. And they missed him badly against Arsenal and Palace, games that they barely created a chance in. They were toothless against Arsenal. The other night against Newcastle, they didn't struggle for chances, and that's because the captain was back in underpinning the attacks, but doing it again in a different role. And that's why I thought last season was his best season for United, in that he assumed greater responsibility as captain, but he also played in a few different roles. He played on the right, he played deep in midfield. I think it's a bit of a pity that although they've got and had quite a lot of options in central midfield this season, I think it's a pity that he's not really played there that often, because he showed last season what a good central midfielder he is. And whether he plays false nine, number 10, central midfielder on the right, you always get a tune out of him. That was noticeable last season. I wrote about that chapter and verse, and it's not a surprise when he comes in and plays as well as he does. And I think it struck me maybe during the Palace game that there aren't too many current United players that the supporters serenade or have a chant in their honour to. But Fernandes is the one whose name is constantly chanted the loudest, and there's a reason for that, because he's the captain, because he's the best player, and because he's been their best player pretty much since Sir Alex Ferguson retired 11 years ago. And when you factor all that into account, you consider that the best case scenario possibly for him in terms of European football next season could be the Europa League or the Europa Conference League. It does feel a bit of a travesty, and that's why there is uncertainty around his future, because there are no two ways about it. He is a Champions League player.
He's just such a fantastic footballer. I think he finds new ways to impress me almost every season. And I mean, in terms of goals and assists, his output has probably reduced over the last couple of years, but he's definitely become a better all-round player, and he's added bits to his game that I probably didn't see when he first arrived. And I love my stats. When he first came to the club, I mean, since then, January 2020, he's created more big chances than any other player in the Premier League. He just keeps on creating, no matter what. No matter how bad United are playing or struggling or performing in the league, Fernandes is always there. He's the ever-present, and he's been fantastic. So let's discuss his future a little bit more, Samuel. I think he did it on the other podcast. I mean, his contract expires in 2026. There's another year on that. He's 29 years old now. So I think from Fernandes' perspective, you could probably understand why he would consider a move away from United, because at this stage of his career, the Ineos rebuild is probably going to take around 2 or 3 years to get back to challenging for the Premier League title. And if he wants to win a league title, then he might have to do that away from United. But on the other hand, United need to keep Bruno Fernandes, and you get the impression that he would love to stay.
I think love is maybe a stretch. I think he would be content or happy in that he'd be still playing for a big club. There is a big challenge next season at United to get them back into the Champions League, to make them a credible force again. But the problem is that was the challenge he took on when he first went there in January 2020. They weren't in the Champions League, and without him that season, there's no way they'd have finished in the top 4. I think in a parallel universe, if United end that transfer window having not signed Bruno Fernandes, they don't finish in the top 4 and they don't qualify for the Champions League through a Premier League finish. And that's the frustrating thing. That must be the frustrating thing for him. I mean, I did the story on Tuesday that there are big clubs interested in him in Europe, because that was, speaking to people, that was that was something that was key to establish, because there has been quite a bit of noise or certainly chatter around a possible move to Saudi Arabia, and that would be a shame because he's an elite footballer still, and because of his prominence, and he could very easily be playing for Portugal at the next European Championship. He should certainly be in that Portugal team at the World Cup in the United States in a couple of years. And I know that quite a few Portuguese players have gone to Saudi Arabia, and they're still getting into the national team squad. I think because the national team coach is Roberto Martinez, and he's not exactly a hard taskmaster, that has something to do with it. But also, knowing Fernandez's personality and having spoken to him a number of times and interviewed him, it would go against the grain for him to go to Saudi Arabia. And it wasn't a surprise when I was told that Bayern Munich and Inter Milan are interested in him, and somebody else said Paris Saint-Germain. I think when you consider most of the elite clubs in European football, you think, could he fit into those teams? And the answer, more often than not, is yes. Real Madrid, no, there's no need for him there, because they've got Jude Bellingham, and they're going to have Kylian Mbappe, and they've got Rodrigo and Vinicius Junior and Tchouameni and Camavinga, and Toni Kroos is still going strong. Luka Modric is still going. Federico Valverde. It's absurd the quality that they have in that squad. But you could certainly see him in Bayern Munich's team. I think Bayern Munich probably do need a creative fulcrum in that side to support Harry Kane. And if they were to team up, it would be pretty fascinating, because that's what Ten Hag would have loved to have had at Manchester United this season. I think he would not have any problem getting up to speed in Italy. It's a more sedate pace, and he's of course played there before earlier in his career. And the word from United is that Fernandes would be happy to stay, and they would prefer to keep Fernandes as well. And people at United are saying that Fernandes has told them that he wants to stay. And this was on Tuesday. And then, of course, he does his interview post-match on Wednesday. And yes, it's a little bit raw. And there's the possibility that he's just played at Old Trafford for United for the final time. But he didn't have to offer up those words. And the reason for that is that because he is open to leave. And he said that in an interview in his mother tongue 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's what's pretty much started all of this debate around his future, and it's why those of us who are on the patch have to a duty bound to source stories regarding Fernandez's future, because if he were to leave Manchester United in the summer, that would be a pretty seismic departure. As you said, he's got 2 years left on his contract. I think the fee they committed to spending on him was something like £67 million in January 2020 when he joined from Sporting Lisbon. He is easily worth minimum £60 million in the current market. When you look at his efficacy, when you look at, although he is 29, he's turned 30 later this year, Harry Kane was pretty much in that situation last year at Tottenham, and Bayern Munich, was it about 100 million euros, the fee that they agreed in the end. And that's because Harry Kane is one of the best strikers in the world, and Fernandes is one of the best attacking midfielders in the world. So I think £60 million, pounds not euros, would be a starting point for negotiations if anyone was to come in. And now maybe that would be a deterrent, and maybe his age would be a deterrent as well. But so many players, they just play well on into their 30s in this day and age. Now you've got Mats Hummels, who's going to be starting in the Champions League final at the age of 35. Robert Lewandowski signed for Barcelona at the start of last season. He must be 35 or 36. I'd have thought. I'd be slightly surprised if he's any younger than 35. There are so many examples of players in recent. I mean, just look at Toni Kroos and Luka Modric at Real Madrid, who are still going strong. Modric is 38, Ashley Young, even at Everton, because he's such a natural athlete, is still going strong as a Premier League fullback, which is such a demanding role at the age of 38. So I think the days when a player would approach 30, and I think some of us still look at it and think quite naturally, he's turning 30, maybe best not. I think that mindset does need to change, and we've just got to acknowledge that maybe 35 is the new 30 now because of the endurance of players and how well they look after themselves. And of course, with Kane, a lot of people would have seen that as a con in terms of going for him and paying that amount of money for someone who just turned 30 last year, but you're getting Harry Kane. And although Bayern Munich haven't and won't win anything this season, just look at his goals output. Nobody's surprised by it. He's still he is still probably the best. I think he's in terms of him and Haaland. Haaland is the better goal scorer. Kane is the better striker because he's got more to his game. He's such an intelligent footballer, and you would be getting bang for your buck with Fernandes if you brought him in. And look, I hope he stays at United because, one, from a journalistic perspective, he's great to deal with. He's a great talker. He represents the club superbly on and off the pitch. He's absolutely, if you're looking for the prototype for Manchester United signing, Fernandes is the prototype in terms of his mentality, his skill set, the way he conducts himself off the pitch, his determination, his drive. He would not look out of place in Ferguson's greatest teams or greatest squads. But if he is to leave, then I hope it's to go to a big European club, because I think it'd be such a waste if he was to go to Saudi Arabia.
You discuss those reasons there away from the pitch, and you think about his professionalism, his attitude, and how he carries himself, and playing for injury as well. I mean, until just the other week, he'd never missed a club game for injury, which is just insane in his career. For all those reasons, combined with his quality, it would just be a huge blow if he left. It would just be a massive shame. I think United have to do everything they can to keep him this summer. We'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll run through some individual performances, I think, in this part as usual. Ahmad was fantastic again, Samuel, an assist and a goal. I mean, the assist kind of scuttled through for me, and he didn't, I think, for a few legs, but his goal, that was an excellent strike, a really thunderous effort into the back of the net. I don't think Dubravka had much of a chance, even though it was kind of in the centre, it wasn't really in the corner. But Ahmad, again, really performed. He took his chance. We've been seeing it for months now. He returned from injury in December. We've been saying, come on, give him a chance. He's finally had a few opportunities in the last week, and he's delivered. He's took them with both hands.
He has. And Ten Hag, when he's been asked about him in the past, the last two post-match press conferences, he's highlighted the injury he had, almost trying to use it as an excuse for why it's delayed his first meaningful start for United, which was against Arsenal last week. But it just doesn't wash, because yes, it was a significant injury, and he was out for 5 months after he sustained that. I think it was a knee injury, wasn't it, against Arsenal in New Jersey back in July. But his first appearance of the season was in December, and I think the next, which was at Nottingham Forest when United lost. The next game was away to Wigan in the FA Cup, I think. And I think he was unwell for that, and he wasn't in the squad. But apart from that game, he's pretty much been available for every game since. And there have been very obvious opportunities to start him. And I mean, Newport County away, I think when we probably did our panel for that game, I think most of us probably would have had Ahmad down on the right for that. United's been away for 2 weeks. It was an opportunity to turn the page and get into try and get some form really ahead of the business end of the season. But Ten Hag, to nobody's surprise, started Anthony, and then a month later he started Amari Forson ahead of Ahmad against Fulham, which was probably his most bizarre selection of the season, especially given how just out of his depth Forson looked, and he's almost certain to be released as well in the summer. And every time Ahmad has come on, or almost every time, he's had a positive impact. And when he was coming on as a substitute, United every time were either drawing or losing. And so you think, well, if you start him, maybe you'll be winning. And that's what happened against Newcastle. And he contributed with, as you said, an assist and a goal. I mean, we did keep or sell, didn't we? Was it last week or the week before? And I had him down as the keep because I just think in a summer where a lot of forwards could or should be sold or need to go, he is one worth keeping. If you've got him as a right-sided option, you're bringing another forward in there who frankly, is just better than Anthony and more suited to the Premier League. Then I think you've got two pretty good options there. I was just distracted there because it came up on the United push notification statement in bold, but it's to do with Mark Skinner as future as the women's coach, which I assume will be that he's leaving at the end of the season. This is me waiting for breaking news to just load up on my phone here. Oh no! Signs a new contract. There you go. Signs a new contract.
So, they've just won the FA Cup, haven't they?
Yeah,
the weekend. So
there were quite a lot of.
Well, I say that, but I'm alluding to the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans who follow the women's team seem to be calling for him to go or wanted a change of coach, but he's got a new contract, and it was we didn't really cover it earlier in the week, but that was a tremendous day for them last Sunday. I mean, they absolutely thrashed Tottenham. So yeah, a brief detour there, but back to Ahmad. I think we all just wondered why it took so long to start him, and he performed pretty well against Arsenal at the weekend. He was even better against Newcastle, and these were two meaningful games as well against two teams above United in the table, two teams who finished in the top four last season. He did really well, and he's coming up against quality players as well. As I said to you earlier, Lewis Hall, I've always liked the look of from when he was at Chelsea, and I'm sure he'll be more of a regular at Newcastle next season. I'm sure there is some method into why Eddie Howe has been reluctant to start him this season, but to come up against him and to perform well is no mean feat. And given that Ahmad will probably start this weekend, and then after this weekend it's the FA Cup final, you have to think, well, is he going to start the FA Cup final? Because that's a big that would be a big call, given that Ten Hag has favoured tactical alterations to the front six against Manchester City, and Fernandes has played on the right a couple of times when they went to the Etihad in when was it? Was it March? Yes, it was March. Sorry. Yeah. It was Fernandes as the false nine that day as well, wasn't it? And that did contribute to Marcus Rashford's goal, because he was the furthest forward when he latched onto that pinpoint pass from Andre Onana. So although it would be difficult to ignore Ahmad's form if he does sustain it in the game against Brighton, I still suspect, just because of the quality and the caliber of the opponents at Wembley, that he'll have to settle for a bench role. But it's good that United are in this position, that they have got some players who are in form or hitting form at the right time. It's overdue in some cases, but they can't go into an FA Cup final with a team on their backsides and struggling in every game. The vital thing in the midweek was that they won, and they also got a performance to go with it.
And on the bright side, I think we're learning about Ahmad. I think I made the point, I was quite frustrated because I thought we were going to reach the end of the season and we didn't really know where his ceiling was going to be. And I thought, to be honest, if he's not going to get a chance, he's going to leave the club, or he's definitely going to push for some sort of an exit. He's clearly very frustrated. But now he's had these opportunities, you can see his talent, and he's actually proven it, because he had that fantastic loan with Sunderland in the Championship, and he was almost talismanic really in that team. He started almost every game, dragged them to the playoffs. But it is a bit different doing it for United at the top level in the Premier League. But he is doing it now, so that's really encouraging to see. And he's definitely got a bright future ahead. You kind of look at that link up with Manu. There's a few times he combined on the pitch, and they're clearly very good friends as well. And I think at the end of the game, it was Garnacho, Manu, and Ahmad all standing together, and they've got a lot of chemistry, those three. And you look at those three young players, they're three young players United could be building around for the next 10 years. They've got that much potential. So it's fantastic to see again. We'll talk about Amrabat, Samuel, another player we're pleased after the Arsenal result. We kind of praised Ahmad and Amrabat. I mean, it probably was, well, it was a penalty when he stood on Anthony Gordon. I don't know how VAR didn't get that, but United got away with that one. But apart from that, it was a good performance, I thought, from Amrabat again. And I think he came out after the game and he said, "You still haven't saw the best version of Amrabat." In a sense, I kind of feel sorry for him, but on the flip side, he wasn't good enough in the first part of the season. But to be fair to him, he's performed in the last few games.
He has, and we did discuss it, and we knew that it wasn't going to happen at the time. But certainly, maybe a month ago, or probably sooner than that, there was an argument. I think you made it. In fact, you were saying there's an argument to bring Amrabat into the team if Casemiro is dropping back, because you need that balance in midfield. And it was apparent when Casemiro came back into the team in January, it coincided with Kobbie Mainoo's first goal, and then he scored a few days later the winner against Wolves. It's been apparent that as brilliant as Mainoo has been this season in other games, but I mean his debut against Everton, sorry, not his debut, his first Premier League start against Everton back in November. Yeah, his full debut. I can't quite remember who his partner might have been that day. Might have been McTominay. Probably was McTominay. But he is better with an outright defensive midfielder next to him, because, and as I've said before, I can see Mainoo eventually developing into a more playmaker type. A little bit like, and again, I am repeating myself, Andres Iniesta, who is still best known as a midfielder, but he could play in the front three, and he was one of the most gifted Spanish footballers there's ever been. So he had no problem doubling as a playmaker when required. And of course, Amrabat has come into the team, and Mainoo has improved, because he was stuck in a little bit of a rut. I thought that there had been some iffy performances. It was not well received when he was taken off against Burnley, but he was not performing that day. And if you've got Christian Eriksen and Mainoo in midfield, and you're a team that dominates the ball and creates chances aplenty, and is functioning as a possession based team, then fine, go with those two. But United aren't that. They need that balance there, and Amrabat has provided that. He's seen an opportunity. It was a long time coming. It was nearly 5 months since he'd last started a Premier League game, when he came into the team against Arsenal. And he started well in terms of robbing Trossard off the ball. And come the second half, when he was beating Bukayo Saka in a duel, as off colour as Saka was on the day, he was getting another round of applause, and deservedly so. And as I said earlier, that shift he put in on Wednesday night, and tracking back and stretching every sinew to get something onto Isak's shot that looped onto the crossbar, that was pivotal, because had that gone in, would United have had the wherewithal to recover from going 1-0 up to 2-1 down, and then getting something out of that game? The evidence this season wouldn't suggest so, and that could have killed their league season. As it turns out, it does give them something to play for at Brighton on Sunday, and Amrabat absolutely should be in the team as well. But certainly in the case of him and Ahmad, they are two players who've come in who have improved them and provided better balance. Ahmad is far more suited to English football, Premier League football, than Anthony is, and Amrabat is a defensive midfielder. So I don't think they're just logical inclusions who probably should have come in some time ago. I think I might even have had Amrabat in my team for the Palace game in terms of the panel team. If he wasn't in midfield, then it certainly would have been Casemiro, because it was abundantly clear at that point that Mainoo and Eriksen was just a midfield mismatch, and Ten Hag has cottoned on, probably too late in terms of making. Well, I mean, the league season is not going to be a success anyway, but at least he's going to have two good options in terms of defensive midfielders going into the FA Cup final. And it's a strange quandary, because the way Amrabat is playing, you think, well, how can you not start him in the FA Cup final? But then if they have got possibly 4 centre-backs available for the cup final to start, if Varane and Lindelof were to get minutes this weekend, then and anyway, would you play Casemiro at centre-back? No. So does Casemiro get in the team? Because Mainu has to
Absolutely
start.
not for me. Absolutely not. I think you have to start Amrabat. I think you can probably overthink it and revert back to what worked, but Casemiro's just not been good enough. And you
Would
have to
he
go
do
off.
that? I mean, I agree in
You have to
essence,
pick the team on
but
form, surely,
Casemiro has
don't
been.
you?
Yeah, I think you do, but that's the irony of it. I mean, Casemiro has been available for pretty much every game since the March internationals. He's been one of the few outfield players who's actually avoided injury and pretty much played every game. But come cup final day, there is a reasonable chance that when push comes to shove, he'll be shoved to the bench.
It was just that moment in the first half, Samuel, when Casemiro stepped out and he lost the ball. And it was a simple 10-yard pass, and he's done that so often this season. I mean, I've made made the point a few times where he makes simple passes look difficult now, and I have been quite critical of him actually. And to be fair, look, he has played at centre half, and it is not easy dropping into a position that isn't your natural role, so that has to be taken into account.
Mm.
Just on that Amrabat moment when he kind of stifled that attack. If you freeze that Newcastle attack, when you've got Isaac driving forward, and Anthony Gordon, I think it was Longstaff as well. I mean, it was against all odds that Amrabat recovers there. He did
Mm.
fantastically well. There is an element of Newcastle messing that up. They should score 3-1,
Yeah.
but he did very well to recover. Moving on then, Samuel, as we mentioned, Højlund was dropped. Fernandes played as a false 9. Højlund came on and got a goal, which will do wonders for his confidence, won it after an in-out spell. Is that fair to say again?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said earlier, he did everything right in terms of taking it in engineering the space, clean strike on it, and it poses the question of the keeper. And in the keeper's case, Dubravka, he couldn't answer it. It was poor goalkeeping, but Højlund did what he had to do. And it happens so often that a player is being played. He's overplayed to the extent that he's actually like played out of form, and that was the case with Højlund, because he wasn't getting chances. He was never looking like scoring. There was an element of naivety as well with that nudge on Dean Henderson, as soft as the foul was, that was given at Palace with United 1-0 down. A cuter striker just doesn't make that foul. That was naivety on his part. And it's not a surprise because he's a raw, callow striker who has not got did not have much big league experience before he came to United. I think his season has kind of played out certainly how I expected it at the start of the season. If someone said if he gets 15 goals, that has to be considered an individual success, I'd have said, yeah, absolutely. And he's got more goals in his first season at United than Berbatov got in 2008, 2009. As I've said before, Berbatov was Premier League proven. He had 2 excellent years at Tottenham. He was a club record signing at the time as well for 30.75 million. But that shift from Tottenham, who have a loser's mentality, frankly, and still do, to United, who had and winner's mentality doesn't quite cover it at the time. It was difficult for him to recalibrate, and come the end of the season, he didn't even start in the Champions League final, and he was the most expensive player in the squad. And that's what going to Manchester United can do to even established players. He'd have been 20, 27, 28 at the time, Berbatov, I think. So for Højlund to get 15 goals this season is really good going. But we also said at the start of the season, it could be really good going for him, but it might not be enough. Might not be enough for United to have a good season. And that's turned out to be the case, because he should have been signed as a number 2. I think anyone who knows football knew that at the time. And I've said it time and again, United, it was unfair what they did to him, really, in terms of the fee they paid and making him the main striker when he didn't have the support network, or he lacked a support network. He was never going to get support from Anthony Marshall. Everybody knew that, apart from, it seems, those who were conducting the transfer policy at the club. they couldn't account for Marcus Rashford having the season that he's had. He scored 22 goals fewer than last season, which has made a huge difference to United's campaign and accounts for why they are where they are. They were third this time last year. They're now eighth. So it's been a big burden for Højlund to shoulder, and then he's had other things to deal with. That there are, as I wrote this week, there are some players who have had doubts about him, and I think Gary Neville pretty much corroborated that story on Monday Night Football when he listed the strikers who played more than 950 minutes of Premier League football this season. And the one with the lowest shots per 90 minutes was Rasmus Højlund. And Neville went through some of the clips from the Arsenal game and said that he's not getting serviced. And, I obviously I noted Højlund's celebration and, maybe, if I was in FPL, maybe I'd claim points for an assist in midweek. I've kind of pointed United in the right direction. Højlund came out of the team. They played better. He came back into the team. He was jolted. He was motivated, and he scored. So
Samuel is saying that.
Maybe I played my part.
He is having
that
seriously before anyone takes him at face value.
Some are heading off to their keyboards or frothing at the mouth already, I'm sure.
I mean, from a Ten Hag perspective, just the perfect night, really, because especially when you drop a player, it was phrased as a rest, obviously, and you take him out of the team. If he then comes onto the pitch and scores a goal, it's just perfect management, isn't it, really? And it sets him up perfectly for the next two games. So Ten Hag will be really happy with that. Let's discuss his speech then, post-game, Samuel. He got on the pitch again and addressed the fans. He did it last season. What did you make of it? I thought there was some similarities with Louis van Gaal's speech before the FA Cup final, actually, which maybe doesn't bode well.
I think it was longer than Van Gaal's in 2016. I think Van Gaal's was quite succinct. Did you watch it back?
Only because I saw another clip of it.
Yeah, I
couldn't
did.
Remember off the top of my head. I'm not that weird.
Was it after the It was after the Bournemouth game, wasn't it? Which is a strange setting anyway, because it had been postponed by 3 days because of the false bomb scare that caused the evacuation at Old Trafford, which was a pretty major story at the time. But it's in this era of major Manchester United stories, it kind of gets forgotten about. But I remember looking at archive footage of Tommy Docherty saying after they lost the FA Cup in '76 that we'll be back next year to bring the cup back, and I think Docherty kind of privately regretted saying that at the time. It was almost tongue in cheek, not expecting it to happen. And of course, they did do that in '77 when they beat Liverpool. And the speech that Ten Hag gave, it was. Obviously, I can't recite it verbatim. Unfortunately, I think that would be weird, but it did feel similar to what he said when he addressed the crowd at the end of the season last year when they just beaten Fulham 2-1. I think there'd have been some people who'd have thought, don't give him the mic, given the uncertainty over his position. But maybe it would have been seen as more significant if he wasn't given a microphone to address the crowd. You can overthink these things, but there was absolutely no harm done. The supporters appreciated it. Whatever the result on Wednesday night, they were always going to embark on a lap of honour, and I think they'd have been able to do that safely anyway, because they got thumped 4-0 by Crystal Palace last week and went over to the away end, and the away end were completely supportive. It was very, very difficult to see any sign of mutiny or anger in that section. It was nothing like when they got battered 4-0 by Brentford last season, and you only have to have a look in Getty at the images taken at full time, and you can see V signs, you can see middle fingers, you can see some choice words, to put it mildly, being hollered in the direction of the United players, and it was nothing like that at Selhurst Park. The United fans were chanting, and the players lingered for a long time to applaud them. So I think Ten Hag, as most managers, when they come to United, realise he really appreciates and sounds a little bit taken aback by just how good the support has been during tough times. And it's not always been smooth this season. There have been several games where United have been booed, or his substitutions have been booed because of the choice of player who has come off. The only thing that I thought was, I was a bit bewildered by the other evening was the rendition of Anthony Marshall's chant at the death when he did the lap of honour, simply because the same set that same section 2 years ago, they were literally telling Paul Pogba to F off repeatedly, and here they were serenading a player who's 6 weeks behind schedule on his return from groin surgery and hasn't played in more than 5 months. And that final appearance at Bournemouth, when his number came up, there were huge cheers from Manchester United fans. So I know time is a great healer, and undeniably Anthony Marshall gave United fans some great moments, but it did still feel a little bit bewildering that he got that send off. But again, United fans are applauding them after they're getting thumped 4-0 at the moment. So going off that, then it's not a surprise that Marshall got serenaded at the end.
It wasn't just obviously Martial that was waving goodbye. It was Rafael Varane as well, who had a moment sitting down on the pitch, taking it all in. It does surprise us kind of how these players get emotionally attached or invested. And perhaps you think, look at Varane's time at the club. It's been pretty disappointing, hasn't it, really, on the whole? Like, he's done okay. He's won the Carabao Cup. You compare it to Real Madrid, where he had a fulfilling, amazingly successful time. It's a bit different, isn't it, really? But we're going to see the back of those two. So the French Revolution's over in Manchester. But I was surprised at the reception Martial got as well, I must admit. That's why I thought it was worth mentioning. I think there's that kind of sentimentality, isn't there, from his first few years when he was brilliant. But his last 5 have just been crap. So you put it like that, it's just the truth, isn't it? It's the truth.
I think you can even reduce it to his first year. He was brilliant. He wasn't brilliant in the second season or the third season. He was good in Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's first full season, but what's his average? Is it something like 9.3 goals per season for a number 9? It's pretty dismal, and he's missed a lot of football in the past 3 years as well.
High IT though, high XIT, sorry, I should say, which is expected injury table time. Obviously spent a lot of time on the treatment table, getting injured and getting patched up. Bless him. We'll leave it there for part 1. We'll move on to part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now United are back in action on the final Premier League game of the season on Sunday afternoon against Brighton down at the MX Stadium. Me and Samuel are making the long drive. It is a long drive as well, Samuel. 5 hours each way back to Manchester, there and back on Sunday. United are now level with Newcastle, both on 57 points, but I think the key thing is Newcastle have a significantly better goal difference. So United need to better Newcastle's result to get that Conference League spot if they want that. But of course, they could obviously go into the Europa League if they win the FA Cup. So now we've had that bit of overview. Any changes for the game? We've kind of discussed them throughout this podcast already. I think we're both in agreement that Ahmad and Amrabat have to start this game.
Yes, I think there'll be minimal changes just because you don't want players to go too long without playing in a competitive game, and it does help that there are plenty of positives from the other night, as we've just discussed. But one of them is that there is something riding on this game this weekend. So Ten Hag has to pick a competitive team and not a particularly weakened team or a heavily rotated team. I think last season, I looked it up, that Fulham game, they still hadn't secured third place. And I think it was 7 players who started against Fulham started in the FA Cup final 6 days later. And I imagine there'll be something similar this weekend, that Martinez, having come through the game the other night, I think has to start. That's in his interests and in United's interests, because he is absolutely crucial to their defence, and he could be crucial in the FA Cup final as well. I would certainly rest Garnacho. He was quite weak the other night, but he he's been overplayed this season, and he's been overplayed because somehow he's stayed injury free, and there hasn't been a more senior or dependable peer in the attack to take on that role. So I would certainly give him a rest. Højlund has to start because you want to try and strike while the iron is hot after he got a goal the other night. And beyond that, I'd be reluctant to really change much, or certainly in terms of trying to look at it through from Ten Hag's perspective. I don't think there'll necessarily be any more changes. He can't change a fullback.
From your perspective, sorry Samuel for interrupting. I mean, I checked the panel before we came on. Me and you've submitted our teams for the weekend, and you chose Harry Amas at fullback, who's obviously had a fantastic season for the under-18s. If he's fit, I might have a knock actually. I think after that Chelsea game midweek. So, but if he is available, would you select him and give him his debut?
I would, but I've had him in my team quite a lot recently because the whole Wan-Bissaka on the left, Dalot on the right, Dalot on the left, Wan-Bissaka on the right. It's been difficult to keep up, and it's never particularly worked. I mean, Wan-Bissaka got a real chase in from Anthony Gordon the other evening, and he was, I think him and Garnacho were United's two weakest performers. It's an absolute cast iron certainty that Wan-Bissaka will start the FA Cup final because United will have only two fullbacks to pick, and those two, Wan-Bissaka and Dalot, they've pretty much started every game since, would it have been Liverpool in the FA Cup quarter final, going back to St Patrick's Day. So at least they've stayed fit. That's probably the only positive that you can say about those two in terms of their form and the regularity of their presence in the team, because it's not worked, and Ten Hag is changing it quite a lot, and it's not really working. It's seldom worked, in fact. Wan-Bissaka obviously went to the left against Palace last week with a view to being pitted against Michael Elise, but Elise plays a little bit more inside, and it was almost as if United didn't consider that when they were going through how they should line up at Selhurst Park. But maybe it was just a moot point given how the team looked that night anyway. But defensively, you look at Martinez has to come in. Varane won't start, and rightly so. You'd want to bring him on in the second half. Lindelof, so be it. I can give or take him, really. I don't think he should be starting in the FA Cup final unless he's the only other available centre half. I'd have Johnny Evans starting ahead of him, and Evans, as I've said before, he did very well at the Etihad in March, and United went to pot when he had to come off, and that's kind of been his season in a microcosm, that game, in that he performed well, but he broke down because he's a 36-year-old who had injury issues last season, has had injury issues this season. But it would be a hell of a success story, individual success story for Johnny Evans if he was to start in an FA Cup final. But I think they've got to aim for Varane and Martinez. There's a good kinship between those two. I mean, you look at the games they had together last season and the rapport they developed, and of course they start in the League Cup final, and Martinez spoke or posted reverentially about Varane on his Instagram account. You've got to aim for that. Ultimately, which two defenders would you want up against Erling Haaland of United centre backs, given the current state of play? It's got to be Martinez and Varane, given that Harry Maguire won't be playing against Brighton at the weekend.
See, I'd have Varane starting against Brighton, but I kind of guess, I kind of agree as well with your reasons for not starting him and bring him on the second half, then play him. This is a man who can only
essentially start one game per week as well. I think he's only started twice a week when he's absolutely had to.
It's a very good point. I mean, there is a week between the games, though. I suppose both on Sunday, of course, a week apart. Well, sorry, the FA Cup finals on Saturday, so it's not a week.
6 days,
yeah. So I'd like to see him have a bit of rhythm and start, but no, I do get that. I mean, they've got to come back together, don't they? Varane and Martinez have one last dance. I made the point in my copy for the panel piece. It's like Michael Jordan when he says, "I took that personally." Like Varane, he wasn't going to get a contract on the same wage, and maybe he took that personally, and he'll deliver in the FA Cup final and inspire United
very
to
well
an
done.
unlikely victory
Very nicely done
at Wembley. But it will be, on a serious note, it will be great to see them back, won't it, Samuel? Because they've been such a miss this season. Their partnership was fantastic last season.
Certainly was. I mean, United have had some reasonable short-term partnerships since Ferdinand and Vidic's heyday, and I think it's often forgotten that although Ferdinand and Vidic left that same summer in 2014, they hadn't been playing together regularly for quite some time because of their age, because of injuries. Certainly in Ferguson's final season, Vidic was out for a while, and when United played Real Madrid in the Bernabeu, it was Johnny Evans and Rio Ferdinand. They were United's two best centre halves that season. Evans effectively got a new contract on the back of a good start that he made to the 2012-13 season. The season before that, Chris Smalling had a good run alongside Nemanja Vidic. So although Ferdinand and Vidic left in 2014, that partnership at its peak, or certainly the final peak spell that they had together, probably going back to possibly 2011, weirdly, just because of injuries that they had or spells out of the team or lack of form. So it's actually been a lot longer than 10 years that United have been seeking a new long-term partnership. And football has changed a lot, or it's evolved a lot, to the point that Gabriel and Saliba at Arsenal are almost a novelty, a centre-back partnership, because you look at Manchester City, how often their defence changes, and sometimes it feels like although Kyle Walker is a right back, it's almost like he is occupying the role of centre back just for the sake of saying Pep Guardiola's playing 4 centre backs in his back 4 again, and Walker has experience of playing there. But when you consider United's goals against column this season and how much better they were as a defensive unit with Martinez and Varane in that team last season, there is still infinite sense in seeking an outright partnership. And of course, it's going to be important who that midfielder is they sign to go next to Kobbie Mainoo next season, but also possibly equally as important is the centre half that comes in to partner Martinez, because that Martinez is pretty much a non-negotiable, even if it's Ten Hag or not Ten Hag as manager next season. I think you've got to accept that he has immense strengths, and he did very, very quickly dispel the doubters last season after a pretty chastened start against Brighton and Brentford.
I'm just thinking, if you've rested Garnacho, have you presumably started Rashford then?
Yes, because you need Rashford to get a bit of rhythm. He didn't have many minutes the other night. He's not had many minutes over the past month, and although I don't think he will start the FA Cup final, he needs to be motivated, and he needs to have a form of sharpness, because he could still have a big say in the game.
I think that's interesting, though. Could the prospect of Rashford starting on the bench in the FA Cup final? I mean, it shouldn't be, because you should pick your team on form, and his performances have been up and down, and he probably doesn't deserve to start. But because of who he is and his profile and what he can bring to a game, because of his goal that he scored at the Etihad in March, what a fantastic goal that was, it would be really, really big, I think, a big call to start Rashford on the bench at Wembley.
It would be, and because he's been available for these 2 games this week as well, I suppose that would make it a bigger call. But unfortunately for him, I think I fear for him next week could be one of the worst weeks of his career, in that the England squad's announced on the Tuesday, and there's got to be a very high chance that he doesn't make that 26-man cut, even with 3 more players than usual. I'm not a big fan of that. I somewhat understood it for the 2022 World Cup. I don't really understand it on this occasion. It seems like Gareth Southgate has changed his tune, because I don't think he was a fan of the 26-man concept for the World Cup, but now he is in favour of it for the Euros coming up, and possibly that will reprieve Rashford. But there's got to be a reasonable chance that next Tuesday his name is not among those 26 players in the England squad for the Euros, and then on the Saturday his name on the FA Cup final team sheet is listed among the substitutes. And he's been recovering from 2 injuries, I was told this week. He's had sore ribs and a sore heel, and I think although it's not been too serious. It's his heel has been quite tender, and it's been a case of him taking his time to ensure that he's absolutely fine for the FA Cup final and possibly, maybe it's wishful thinking, the European Championship, but it's a difficult position for him to be in going into next week when you consider those two possibilities. And maybe he can turn it around. Maybe if he performs this weekend, and he really does need to perform, because then he's very present in Southgate's mind, and maybe Southgate will think, look, this guy's got big tournament experience. He's known the highs and he's known the lows of big tournament experience. He did very well at the last World Cup. He had that penalty just hit the post, didn't it, in the Euros final, in the shootout. He's played in 4 major tournaments for England, so he could go on his gut instinct if Rashford does perform this weekend. But I'm looking at it from what's best for United. I think it's best for United that Garnacho has a breather this weekend. Rashford comes in, so that both of them have got some freshness going into the cup final on Saturday week.
I think he just gets in because of the reasons you've just said. I mean, we know Southgate has his favourites, and Rashford has done well for England over the last 18 months, 2 years or so, and he's been involved in many squads since he emerged at United as an academy graduate. So I think that will see him in. And you're right, it would make it such a bigger blow if he doesn't get in the England squad, if it's been extended by 3 men, and he still doesn't get in. That would really hurt, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you very much for your time, Samuel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Stephen. Pleasure as always, and I will see you on Sunday in Hove.
Yeah, South Coast. If the car makes the drive, we'll see. So tune in to find out on Monday. Could be an interesting review. Have a great weekend to the listeners, and we'll catch you then. Thank you.